Ethan adjusted the straps of his backpack as he walked along the damp, cobbled streets of Belwick, a sleepy village nestled in the cradle of foggy hills. The morning mist clung to the air like a whisper, veiling the worn stone houses and narrow alleys in a silvery haze. Max, his loyal golden retriever, padded silently at his side, ears alert and tail swaying low. Ethan had only been in Belwick for a few days, hoping the tranquility would help him process the recent loss of his sister, Emma. Officially, her disappearance had been marked as accidental. No foul play, no signs of struggle. Just vanished, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. But Ethan knew Emma too well. She wouldn't have left without a trace unless something or someone had forced her to. The church stood solemnly in the heart of the village, its steeple pointing like an accusing finger into the grey sky. Belwick's church of St. Verena was as ancient as the hills that embraced it, its heavy wooden doors often closed, and the congregation dwindling over time. But it still held secrets. Secrets Emma had hinted at in the last letter she sent before vanishing. Today, Ethan stood in the old house that Emma had rented during her brief time in the village. Dust curled in the filtered light that poured through stained glass windows. Her things remained largely untouched, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to return. He made his way to the small writing desk by the window. That's when Max let out a low whimper and pawed at something beneath the floorboards. Curious, Ethan knelt and pried the wooden plank loose. A dusty leather-bound journal was nestled underneath, its spine cracked and frayed. He recognized Emma's handwriting instantly. His hands trembled as he flipped open the first page. If anything happens to me, it's because of what I've found. Father Gabriel isn't who he says he is. There's something hidden beneath the church, something he doesn't want anyone to see. He sat down on the floor and read page after page, Max lying close with his head on Ethan's knee. Emma had chronicled her suspicions in vivid detail, strange noises at night from beneath the altar, whispers of missing donations, and her growing conviction that Father Gabriel was involved in something unholy. Her last entry was cut off mid-sentence, as if she had been interrupted. As Ethan closed the journal, something slipped from between its pages, an envelope. Inside were several old photographs. In many of them, Father Gabriel appeared in various shadowed corners of the church, always with the same small metal box in hand. One photo in particular made Ethan's blood run cold. It showed the priest standing beside an old statue of St. Verena, the box set carefully at the statue's base. The angle suggested he was concealing something, perhaps burying it beneath the sacred figure. Ethan stared at the photo for a long moment. Max's ears perked as if he too sensed the weight of the discovery. "So that's it," Ethan murmured. "She found out the truth." His jaw tightened. The urgency was now clear. Emma had gotten too close, and that was why she had disappeared. Whatever that box held, it was the key to the mystery. Ethan rose, the diary clutched in his hands like a lifeline. "Come on, Max. We've got something to uncover." The journey back to the church was silent. Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind of grief, suspicion, and purpose. He and Max navigated the labyrinthine alleys of Belwick with quickening steps. The villagers, few as they were, kept their heads low and their greetings brief. It was as if the whole town lived under an unspoken rule. Don't ask questions, don't seek answers. The church loomed ahead, doors slightly ajar, as though it too had grown weary of guarding its secrets. Ethan pushed them open and slipped inside. Inside, the air was thick with incense and damp stone. Light poured in through stained glass windows, painting the pews with coloured ghosts. Max padded quietly beside him as they moved through the nave toward the side aisle where the statue stood. The statue of St. Verena was positioned in a dim alcove, half hidden behind dusty velvet drapes. Her stone eyes gazed down with an austere solemnity, and her outstretched hand pointed toward the floor as if in silent judgment. Ethan knelt at the base of the statue and began feeling around the edges. The stone was cold beneath his fingers, but soon he found what he was looking for, a hidden indentation covered by a piece of worn velvet cloth. With effort he pulled it away, revealing a small compartment carved into the floor. And there it was, a small dented metal box. Heart-pounding, Ethan lifted it out. The weight of it sent a shudder through him. It was real. He hadn't imagined Emma's words. Max whined softly, his eyes locked on Ethan as if to say, "Be careful." Ethan opened the box. Bundles of cash greeted him first, rolls of money wrapped in paper bands, each labelled with names, donation money, tithes, money that was meant to help the poor, the needy. Ethan's jaw clenched. But beneath the money lay something else. A small brass key, aged but ornate. He picked it up, holding it against the dim light. It felt important. At the very bottom of the box he found a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Carefully, he opened it. A map. At the centre, drawn in red ink, was a circle marked Church Storage. His eyes narrowed. "This is it," Ethan whispered, "the entrance to something hidden." He looked at Max. "We're not done yet." Following the directions on the map, Ethan made his way behind the altar. Max stayed close, alert. Behind a faded tapestry hidden in plain sight was a small wooden door. He hadn't noticed it before. Few would. He pressed the brass key into the lock. It turned with a creak that echoed like thunder in the quiet church. The door opened, revealing a narrow stone staircase winding downward into darkness. Ethan clicked on his flashlight, the beam shaking slightly as his nerves betrayed him. He and Max descended the steps, one by one, the air growing colder and heavier with each level. At the bottom was a corridor, a passage that felt older than the church above it. Damp walls lined with moss stretched forward into the unknown. The faint glimmer of a bulb flickered in the distance like a beckoning ghost. Max growled lowly, and then Ethan heard it. Chains, metal dragging across stone. "Hello?" Ethan called softly. His voice echoed back, warped by the tunnel. They walked slowly toward the sound. The corridor opened into a small square room. In its centre, under the weak bulb, sat a woman, pale, trembling, bound to a chair with chains. "Emma," Ethan gasped. Her head lifted, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ethan?" Before he could move, footsteps thundered behind him. He turned just as Father Gabriel emerged from the shadows, wielding a heavy wooden plank. "You shouldn't be here," the priest snarled, his face twisted with fury. "I warned her not to dig. I warned you." Ethan tried to dodge, but the plank clipped his shoulder and knocked him to the ground. He winced, struggling to rise, the flashlight rolling from his hand. Then, Max! The dog exploded into action, leaping at Father Gabriel with a snarl, sinking his teeth into the priest's leg. The older man howled in pain, trying to shake the dog loose. The plank clattered to the floor. Ethan pushed himself up, adrenaline surging. "You took her! You did this!" With Max still latched onto him, Father Gabriel stumbled back, falling against the wall. Ethan grabbed Emma, fumbling with the chain's lock. With trembling hands he found a loose bolt and pried it free. The chains clattered to the floor. "Let's go," Ethan said, helping Emma to her feet. The three of them, man, woman, and dog, ran from the dark, fleeing toward the light above. But Ethan knew this was far from over. The village needed to see what had been hidden in the church's shadow. The truth had to come out. And Father Gabriel would not give up without a fight. The sun had barely risen over the sleepy village when Ethan sat on the porch, Emma's diary clutched tightly in his hands. The cool morning mist drifted around him like memories come to life. Max, ever alert, lay by his side, ears perked, eyes glancing between Ethan and the quiet road ahead. After reading late into the night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The pages of the diary, filled with Emma's careful handwriting, revealed not just thoughts and feelings, but secrets. Secrets that hinted at something far more sinister than he had imagined. Among the final pages he found an envelope tucked between the creases, aged and fragile, like it had been hidden in haste. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white, clearly taken in secrecy. In some, Father Gabriel stood in forgotten corners of the church, always holding the same small metal box. Ethan's brow furrowed as he looked closely at one photo in particular, Father Gabriel beside a crumbling statue deep inside the church, the box half hidden at the statue's base. "What were you hiding?" Ethan muttered. Max gave a soft whine, as if he too felt the weight of the mystery. Ethan ran a hand over the dog's head. "She found out, didn't she?" he said quietly. "That's why she disappeared." With every passing second, a deepening urgency took hold in Ethan's chest. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He had to go back to the church. He had to find that box. "Let's go, boy," Ethan said, rising to his feet. Max stood instantly, tail wagging, eyes bright with focus. The two of them, man and dog, bound by trust, headed toward the old stone church. The village streets were silent, as if the buildings themselves held their breath. Windows remained closed, curtains barely stirred. Ethan walked briskly, clutching the diary under one arm, his eyes flicking around, watching for movement. Max padded alongside him, muscles tense, nose sniffing the air. They reached the church without being seen. The doors stood slightly ajar, creaking gently with the wind. The inside was cloaked in shadows, stained glass windows casting fragmented light on the stone floor. Ethan stepped in slowly. Every echo of his footsteps seemed louder than it should be. "Let's find that statue," he whispered. The air inside felt thick, like the church itself was resisting his presence. Ethan remembered the photograph and guided Max toward a quiet corner of the sanctuary. There, behind rows of dusty pews and beneath a tall arched alcove, stood the statue, weathered and solemn, its features barely visible through centuries of wear. Ethan knelt at its base. His fingers brushed over cold stone and cobwebs. He remembered how, in the photo, the box had been nestled behind a piece of cloth. He searched until he felt it, a folded fabric, tucked neatly in the shadows. Heart racing, he peeled it back. There, hidden beneath, was a small metal box, just as described. His breath caught. Max gave a low bark of approval, tail wagging furiously. Ethan's hands trembled as he lifted the box into the light. It was heavier than he expected, the cold metal biting at his fingers. He slowly opened the lid. Inside, he found bundles of money, neatly rolled, secured with twine, and labelled with names. Names he recognized from the village. Donations, tithes, offerings, meant for the community, but hidden here out of sight. But that wasn't all. Beneath the money, something else gleamed. A small brass key, ornate, ancient-looking. And beside it, a piece of folded yellowed paper. Ethan unfolded it with care. It was a map of the church grounds, hand-drawn and marked with notes. At the center, a red circle indicated a hidden location labeled church storage. "This is it," Ethan breathed. "This is what Emma found." He turned to Max. "Let's find it, boy." They moved cautiously through the church, following the map's faded lines. The storage room was hidden behind the altar, concealed by a tapestry that seemed long forgotten. Ethan pulled it aside and found a narrow wooden door, its handle covered in dust. With the key in hand, Ethan unlocked it. The door creaked open to reveal a spiral staircase descending into darkness. He paused, flashlight in one hand, and looked at Max. "You ready?" Max barked once, and they descended. The steps creaked beneath their weight, the air growing colder with each turn. The basement was damp, the walls glistening with moisture. At the bottom, a narrow corridor stretched forward, lit only by the flickering beam of Ethan's flashlight. Then a sound, the faint clink of metal, chains. "Hannah?" Ethan called softly, reverting briefly to Emma's real name, his voice barely more than a whisper. No answer. He moved forward, heart thudding in his ears. At the end of the corridor, a faint light glowed from a small room. He stepped inside and stopped cold. Emma was there, chained to a chair, pale but alive. Her eyes widened as she saw him. "Ethan," she gasped, her voice hoarse, trembling. He rushed to her side. "Emma, I found you. It's going to be okay." But before he could free her, footsteps thundered behind him. He turned, too late. Father Gabriel stood in the doorway, eyes blazing, a wooden plank in hand. "You shouldn't be here," the priest growled. "You don't understand what you've done." Ethan barely had time to move. The priest swung. The blow caught Ethan's shoulder, knocking him to the ground. Pain flared and the flashlight clattered across the floor. As Father Gabriel raised the plank again, Max launched forward. With a growl, the dog sank his teeth into the priest's leg. Gabriel screamed in pain, the plank falling from his hands. Ethan rolled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the pain. "Max, hold him!" The dog didn't let go. Gabriel thrashed, but Max held on, his growls echoing off the stone walls. Ethan moved quickly, grabbing the chain's key from the table and freeing Emma. "We need to get out of here," he said, supporting her as she stood, weak and trembling. Together, they climbed the stairs, Max herding Gabriel up behind them, barking, growling, biting when necessary. The noise of the struggle grew louder as they burst out into the morning light. Villagers had already gathered outside, drawn by the chaos. When they saw Father Gabriel bleeding, restrained by Ethan and Max, their shock turned to confusion, then suspicion. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his voice. "This man kidnapped Emma. He's been stealing from the congregation. I found the box. I found everything." He held up the diary, the map, the key, the box with money still inside. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People murmured, confused, betrayed. They looked at Father Gabriel, their trusted leader, now exposed. And then they looked at Emma, fragile but alive, standing beside Ethan. "Come with me," Ethan said. He led them all back into the church. Inside, he opened the metal box in front of everyone, showing the labelled rolls of stolen money. He held up the key and guided them to the hidden storage room. When they saw the chair, the chains, the hidden basement, the truth settled like a thunderclap. Cries of disbelief and anger echoed through the church. Some villagers stepped forward to restrain Father Gabriel. The man who had once preached love and honesty had been living a lie. Ethan looked at Max and placed a hand on his loyal companion's head. "You did good, boy." Max wagged his tail, eyes gleaming. Beside him, Emma whispered, "Thank you, both of you." And as the villagers surrounded the evidence, processing the horror of what had been uncovered, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The village would never be the same. But now, at least, the truth had a voice, and its name was Ethan. Ethan adjusted the straps of his backpack as he walked along the damp, cobbled streets of Belwick, a sleepy village nestled in the cradle of foggy hills. The morning mist clung to the air like a whisper, veiling the worn stone houses and narrow alleys in a silvery haze. Max, his loyal golden retriever, padded silently at his side, ears alert and tail swaying low. Ethan had only been in Belwick for a few days, hoping the tranquility would help him process the recent loss of his sister, Emma. Officially, her disappearance had been marked as accidental. No foul play, no signs of struggle. Just vanished, as if the earth had swallowed her whole. But Ethan knew Emma too well. She wouldn't have left without a trace unless something or someone had forced her to. The church stood solemnly in the heart of the village, its steeple pointing like an accusing finger into the grey sky. Belwick's church of St. Verena was as ancient as the hills that embraced it, its heavy wooden doors often closed, and the congregation dwindling over time. But it still held secrets. Secrets Emma had hinted at in the last letter she sent before vanishing. Today, Ethan stood in the old house that Emma had rented during her brief time in the village. Dust curled in the filtered light that poured through stained glass windows. Her things remained largely untouched, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to return. He made his way to the small writing desk by the window. That's when Max let out a low whimper and pawed at something beneath the floorboards. Curious, Ethan knelt and pried the wooden plank loose. A dusty leather-bound journal was nestled underneath, its spine cracked and frayed. He recognized Emma's handwriting instantly. His hands trembled as he flipped open the first page. "If anything happens to me, it's because of what I've found. Father Gabriel isn't who he says he is. There's something hidden beneath the church, something he doesn't want anyone to see." A chill coiled through his spine. He sat down on the floor and read page after page, Max lying close with his head on Ethan's knee. Emma had chronicled her suspicions in vivid detail, strange noises at night from beneath the altar, whispers of missing donations, and her growing conviction that Father Gabriel was involved in something unholy. Her last entry was cut off mid-sentence, as if she had been interrupted. As Ethan closed the journal, something slipped from between its pages, an envelope. Inside were several old photographs. In many of them, Father Gabriel appeared in various shadowed corners of the church, always with the same small metal box in hand. One photo in particular made Ethan's blood run cold. It showed the priest standing beside an old statue of St. Verena, the box set carefully at the statue's base. The angle suggested he was concealing something, perhaps burying it beneath the sacred figure. Ethan stared at the photo for a long moment. Max's ears perked as if he too sensed the weight of the discovery. "So that's it," Ethan murmured. "She found out the truth." His jaw tightened. The urgency was now clear. Emma had gotten too close, and that was why she had disappeared. Whatever that box held, it was the key to the mystery. Ethan rose, the diary clutched in his hands like a lifeline. "Come on, Max. We've got something to uncover." The journey back to the church was silent. Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind of grief, suspicion, and purpose. He and Max navigated the labyrinthine alleys of Belwick with quickening steps. The villagers, few as they were, kept their heads low and their greetings brief. It was as if the whole town lived under an unspoken rule. Don't ask questions, don't seek answers. The church loomed ahead, doors slightly ajar, as though it too had grown weary of guarding its secrets. Ethan pushed them open and slipped inside. Inside, the air was thick with incense and damp stone. Light poured in through stained glass windows, painting the pews with coloured ghosts. Max padded quietly beside him as they moved through the nave toward the side aisle where the statue stood. The statue of Saint Verena was positioned in a dim alcove, half hidden behind dusty velvet drapes. Her stone eyes gazed down with an austere solemnity, and her outstretched hand pointed toward the floor as if in silent judgment. Ethan knelt at the base of the statue and began feeling around the edges. The stone was cold beneath his fingers, but soon he found what he was looking for, a hidden indentation covered by a piece of worn velvet cloth. With effort he pulled it away, revealing a small compartment carved into the floor. And there it was, a small dented metal box. Heart-pounding, Ethan lifted it out. The weight of it sent a shudder through him. It was real. He hadn't imagined Emma's words. Max whined softly, his eyes locked on Ethan as if to say, "Be careful." Ethan opened the box. Bundles of cash greeted him first, rolls of money wrapped in paper bands, each labelled with names, donation money, tithes, money that was meant to help the poor, the needy. Ethan's jaw clenched. But beneath the money lay something else. A small brass key, aged but ornate. He picked it up, holding it against the dim light. It felt important. At the very bottom of the box he found a folded, yellowed piece of paper. Carefully, he opened it. A map. At the centre, drawn in red ink, was a circle marked Church Storage. His eyes narrowed. "This is it," Ethan whispered, "the entrance to something hidden." He looked at Max. "We're not done yet." Following the directions on the map, Ethan made his way behind the altar. Max stayed close, alert. Behind a faded tapestry hidden in plain sight was a small wooden door. He hadn't noticed it before. Few would. He pressed the brass key into the lock. It turned with a creak that echoed like thunder in the quiet church. The door opened, revealing a narrow stone staircase winding downward into darkness. Ethan clicked on his flashlight, the beam shaking slightly as his nerves betrayed him. He and Max descended the steps, one by one, the air growing colder and heavier with each level. At the bottom was a corridor, a passage that felt older than the church above it. Damp walls lined with moss stretched forward into the unknown. The faint glimmer of a bulb flickered in the distance like a beckoning ghost. Max growled lowly, and then Ethan heard it. Chains, metal dragging across stone. "Hello?" Ethan called softly. His voice echoed back, warped by the tunnel. They walked slowly toward the sound. The corridor opened into a small square room. In its centre, under the weak bulb, sat a woman, pale, trembling, bound to a chair with chains. "Emma," Ethan gasped. Her head lifted, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ethan?" Before he could move, footsteps thundered behind him. He turned just as Father Gabriel emerged from the shadows, wielding a heavy wooden plank. "You shouldn't be here," the priest snarled, his face twisted with fury. "I warned her not to dig. I warned you." Ethan tried to dodge, but the plank clipped his shoulder and knocked him to the ground. He winced, struggling to rise, the flashlight rolling from his hand. Then, Max! The dog exploded into action, leaping at Father Gabriel with a snarl, sinking his teeth into the priest's leg. The older man howled in pain, trying to shake the dog loose. The plank clattered to the floor. Ethan pushed himself up, adrenaline surging. "You took her! You did this!" With Max still latched onto him, Father Gabriel stumbled back, falling against the wall. Ethan grabbed Emma, fumbling with the chain's lock. With trembling hands he found a loose bolt and pried it free. The chains clattered to the floor. "Let's go," Ethan said, helping Emma to her feet. The three of them, man, woman, and dog, ran from the dark, fleeing toward the light above. But Ethan knew this was far from over. The village needed to see what had been hidden in the church's shadow. The truth had to come out. And Father Gabriel would not give up without a fight. The quiet creak of the church doors echoed through the cold morning air as Adrian stepped inside, his breath hanging in delicate clouds before him. The soft rhythm of paw steps followed, Bram, his ever-loyal shepherd dog, padding silently across the dusty floor beside him. Outside, the village still slept beneath a grey sky, unaware of the secrets about to rise from their long slumber. In Adrian's hand, he clutched the metal box they had uncovered beneath the old statue in the sanctuary, a box that had once rested in secret, hidden beneath centuries of silent devotion. It had revealed two things that haunted his thoughts now, a key and a map, both pointing to a place within the church known only as storage. But this was no ordinary storage. The red circle inked on the parchment marked a door behind the altar, one Adrian had never seen used in all the years he'd visited this sacred place. And now, with everything Hannah had recorded in her diary, it was clear this was no coincidence. She had been there before, and she had found something. The hush of the sanctuary pressed around him, thick and solemn. Adrian took a steadying breath, reached the altar, and gently ran his fingers along the old wooden panels. Bram watched him with alert eyes, his ears twitching at every sound. "There!" Adrian whispered, his gaze fixed on a faint outline, nearly hidden behind a tapestry of the Last Supper. With trembling fingers he pulled the fabric aside. A narrow wooden door stared back at him, ancient and crooked on rusted hinges. He pressed the key into the lock. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a reluctant click, the door yielded. A musty breath of air escaped from the dark beyond. It smelled of forgotten places, of mildew and time and secrets buried in stone. Adrian raised his flashlight, the beam cutting a narrow cone through the darkness. A spiral staircase wound downward, vanishing into black. "You ready, boy?" he asked Bram. The dog gave a low, encouraging bark. Together they stepped into the shadows. The steps creaked beneath them, each footfall echoing like a ghost of the past. As they descended deeper, the church above faded to a whisper. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a narrow corridor made of damp, time-worn bricks. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming small puddles that reflected their flashlight's glow. Adrian's heart pounded. It was the same sensation he'd felt the moment he first found Hannah's diary, like the ground was shifting beneath him, like he had crossed an invisible threshold. Then he heard it, a faint metallic rattle somewhere ahead. He froze. Bram growled low in his throat, ears pricked forward. Adrian moved quickly now, his steps faster but careful, flashlight scanning the corridor. At the end stood a heavy door, slightly ajar. Light flickered from within, a dim bulb swaying from the ceiling like a pendulum of dread. He pushed the door open. The sight before him stole the breath from his lungs. Chained to a chair, pale and trembling, was Hannah. "Hannah!" Adrian rushed to her side. Her eyes fluttered open. "Adrian?" "It's okay," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. "I'm here. You're safe now." She gave a weak nod, her voice barely a whisper. "You found the box?" He nodded. "And the map. Everything." Relief flooded her face, but it was short-lived. A sudden noise behind them, a scraping footstep, sent Bram into a frenzy. He barked ferociously, turning to the doorway. Adrian spun around. Standing in the threshold, holding a wooden beam in both hands, was Father Alaric. His face was twisted in fury, eyes wide and unblinking. "You had to keep digging," he spat. "You just couldn't leave it alone." Adrian stood up slowly, placing himself between Alaric and Hannah. "You lied to everyone. You betrayed your own church." "I protected it," Alaric roared. "You don't understand what was at stake. What that girl found, what she planned to reveal, it would have destroyed everything." Adrian's grip tightened on the flashlight. "You kidnapped her. She left me no choice." In a flash, Alaric lunged. Adrian barely dodged the first blow. The beam cracked against the wall, sending dust and debris into the air. Bram sprang forward, teeth bared, leaping onto the priest with a growl of rage. The two crashed to the floor in a chaotic tangle, barking, shouting, limbs thrashing in the dim light. "Bram!" Adrian shouted. Alaric screamed in pain as the dog clamped down on his leg, forcing him to drop the beam. Adrian moved swiftly, wrenching the weapon away and pinning the priest's arm to the floor. "I'm not letting you hurt her again," he said through gritted teeth. Alaric thrashed beneath him. "You know nothing. She uncovered a legacy meant to be kept buried." Adrian slammed the beam down beside his head. "Just a warning. You're done. It's over." The confrontation had been loud, too loud. By the time Adrian dragged Alaric into the main hall, the commotion had drawn villagers from their homes. Curious faces peered through the open doors, whispering among themselves. Adrian raised his voice. "Everyone, please. Come in. You need to see this." He motioned toward the metal box now sitting on the altar. With steady hands, he opened it. The room fell silent. Inside were bundles of cash, donations, each marked with the names of those who had given them. Gasps filled the air. Then Adrian lifted the yellowed paper, the map, and held it high. This led to a secret chamber beneath the church. That's where we found Hannah, chained, abused, left to die. The crowd turned to Alaric, who now cowered under Bram's vigilant watch. "Why?" someone demanded. Adrian pointed at the box. "Because she discovered the truth. The money was being stolen, not for charity, not for repairs, but for something else entirely. Hidden rooms, secrets, lies. Faces that had once looked up to the priest now glared with disbelief and betrayal. The church that had once felt like the heart of their village now pulsed with shame." Hannah was helped to her feet by one of the older women. Tears fell from her cheeks as she met Adrian's gaze. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "You uncovered the truth. I just followed it." The authorities were called. Father Alaric was arrested on multiple charges, embezzlement, false imprisonment, and assault among them. As he was led away, he screamed about legacies and divine will, but no one listened anymore. The spell had broken. In the weeks that followed, the village began to rebuild, not just the church, but their trust, their beliefs. New leadership was appointed. The altar was cleansed. The hidden chamber beneath the church was sealed for good. Adrian chose to stay. He helped Hannah recover, both physically and emotionally. In time, she returned to the simple joys of life, walking in the fields, tending her garden, teaching at the village school. Adrian found peace there too. After years of wandering, searching for meaning, he had found it in a forgotten village, buried in the truth that nearly tore it apart. And Bram, loyal, brave Bram, was hailed as a local legend. Children ran to pet him wherever he went, calling him the hero dog. His bravery had saved lives. One crisp morning, Adrian stood before the rebuilt church, a sense of calm washing over him. He looked down at Bram. "We did it, boy." The dog wagged his tail, nuzzling his friend's hand, and in that moment Adrian understood. Sometimes the darkest paths lead to the brightest truths, and sometimes the bravest hearts wear fur. The village streets were silent as Adrian made his way back from the town square, the moon casting a silver sheen across the cobbled path. Bram trotted beside him, alert and watchful, ears pricking at every distant noise. The night carried a heavy stillness, one that seemed to whisper of things left unsaid, of secrets buried long ago beneath layers of dust and stone. Adrian's hands still trembled from the confrontation with Father Alaric. The memory of that night, Hannah chained in the secret chamber, the embezzled money, the fury in the priest's eyes, it all played again in his mind, like a haunting echo. But amidst the fear and chaos, something had shifted. The village had begun to open its eyes. Hannah was safe now, resting in the care of the local healer, her strength slowly returning. The villagers, initially hesitant and shocked, were beginning to ask questions, to come together and support one another. But Adrian knew the truth hadn't been fully uncovered. What Hannah had found, it went deeper. And whatever had driven Father Alaric to hide and harm, it was still rooted somewhere in that church. The metal box had held more than just money. The map, the key, the locked storage room, they hinted at something buried, something dangerous. As dawn painted the sky in hues of lavender and rose, Adrian sat outside the healer's cottage, watching the light return to the world. Bram rested beside him, one paw draped protectively over Adrian's boot. The dog had barely left his side since the rescue. Adrian leaned down and scratched behind Bram's ears. "We're not done yet, old friend," he whispered. "There's still something under that church. Something that made Alaric risk everything." Bram licked Adrian's hand, as if in agreement. Later that morning, Adrian returned to the church, not with anger or vengeance, but with resolve. The building stood solemn, wounded by the truths that had recently come to light. Its tall spire stretched skyward like a silent witness to all the sins committed within its walls. And yet, even in its shadows, it held answers. Inside, dust hung in sunbeams that filtered through the high-stained glass. The silence was deeper than before, emptier now without Alaric's presence. Adrian moved quietly through the nave, Bram at his heels, heading straight for the far end of the church, where the storage room had been found. He paused at the entrance, key still in his coat pocket. Though the room had been searched once, he had a feeling there was more, hidden beyond what anyone had seen. He unlocked the door and stepped into the dim chamber once more. The faint scent of damp stone greeted him. He knelt beside where Hannah had been held, studying the walls, the floor. Something felt off. Bram sniffed around too, nose brushing along the stones. "See anything, boy?" Adrian murmured. Suddenly, Bram scratched at one corner of the floor. Curious, Adrian moved closer and brushed away the dust. Beneath the grime was a carved symbol, etched directly into the stone, a sun flanked by two curved wings. It wasn't decorative, it was purposeful. He pressed his palm against it and the stone shifted slightly under his touch. A faint click echoed through the chamber, a hidden compartment. Adrian's heart pounded. Bram barked softly, tail wagging but tense. With effort, Adrian pried the loose stone free. Beneath it was a small wooden chest, blackened with age. He lifted it gently, the weight surprising for its size. Carefully, he opened it. Inside lay a collection of old letters, all bound with twine, and a thin, leather-bound journal. The edges of the pages were worn, yellowed by time. On the first page, in delicate looping script, was a name, Brother Elias. Adrian's brow furrowed. He flipped to the first entry. "I no longer sleep. The whispers in the crypt grow louder by the day. Father Alaric does not believe me, but I know what I saw. The artifact is cursed. We should have never taken it." Adrian's skin prickled. He read on, heart sinking with every word. The journal chronicled the secret that the church had hidden for generations, one that stretched back far before Alaric's time. Years ago, during renovations beneath the church, a crypt had been discovered. An ancient one, sealed long before the current building had been erected. In it, the priests found an object made of dark, polished metal shaped like a sun with spiked rays. It emitted a strange warmth, and those who touched it spoke of dreams, visions of fire, of voices in tongues no one recognized. They called it the heart of the eclipse. Brother Elias had begged the others to destroy it, but the senior priests believed it was a divine relic, something to be studied, revered, and hidden from the outside world. But over time, those closest to it changed, became paranoid, violent. Father Alaric, a young priest then, had been one of them. Adrian's hands shook as he read the final entries. The deaths of several monks had been blamed on illness, but Elias had witnessed something far worse. One priest had thrown himself from the belfry, another locked himself in the crypt and never emerged. Madness had taken them. "I tried to destroy it," Elias wrote, "but it would not burn, it would not break. I sealed it in the lower catacombs beneath the altar and swore never to speak of it again. May God forgive me." Adrian sat back, breath shallow. So that was it, not just greed, not just power. Alaric had been protecting this relic, or maybe protecting others from it. Was it still there? He stood, mind racing. If Elias had sealed it beneath the altar, it might still lie in the catacombs untouched for decades. And if so, if Alaric had kept it hidden and Hannah had found out, that would explain everything. He had to see for himself. Back in the main church, Adrian approached the altar. He studied its base, tapping gently, listening for hollows. Bram watched, ears twitching. After several minutes, Adrian's fingers found a groove, subtle, almost invisible. He pushed. A panel shifted open, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward. He took a deep breath. "Ready, boy?" he asked. Bram gave a low whine, but followed as Adrian descended into the cold darkness. The air grew thick with damp and earth. The deeper they went, the older the stones became, ancient and moss-covered, their carvings nearly worn away. At the bottom, the staircase ended in a large underground chamber, lit only by a shaft of light from a crack above. Bats fluttered overhead. The silence was unnerving. Adrian moved cautiously, scanning every corner until he saw it. Another sealed alcove, marked with the same winged sun symbol. He approached, running his fingers along its edge. The wall was solid, but the stone was weaker in one area. With effort he pried at it, and the block slid free, revealing a deep cavity inside. There it was. Resting on a slab of stone was the artifact, a disk of blackened metal about the size of a plate, with jagged rays extending outward like a sun in eclipse. It shimmered faintly even in the low light, pulsing as if alive. Adrian couldn't look away. Suddenly the air around him shifted, grew heavy. A whisper echoed through the chamber. Not a voice he could understand, but present, calling. Bram barked, growling low, sensing something was wrong. Adrian stepped back, breaking the trance. He realized then this was what had driven Father Alaric to madness. Not just greed, not just power. This thing, it influenced people, manipulated them, fed on fear, on devotion. Hannah had found out, and Alaric had snapped, protecting the church's secret at all costs. "We need to get rid of it," Adrian said, voice firm, eyes locked on the artifact. But how? Elias had tried and failed. Maybe the villagers could help. Maybe if they all knew, they could find a way to destroy it together. Adrian carefully replaced the stone, resealing the alcove. Whatever it was, it needed to stay hidden until they could decide what to do. He and Bram made their way back up the stairs, the silence behind them deeper than ever. Back in the sunlight, Adrian's heart felt heavy. The truth was darker than he'd imagined. And while Father Alaric was gone, the danger hadn't passed. He walked through the village square, where the townsfolk were still recovering from the shock of recent events. He stopped at the healer's home and found Hannah sitting up in bed, looking stronger. "You were right," he said softly, handing her the journal. She read a few lines and looked up at him, eyes wide with horror. "What do we do now?" Adrian looked out the window, where Bram sat watching over the street. "We tell them everything, and we make sure this village never hides another secret again." The faint light of dawn spilled through the window of the small room where Adrian sat, Hannah resting peacefully nearby. Bram lay curled at the foot of the bed, occasionally twitching in his sleep, still alert to the slightest sound. The room was quiet, the stillness a welcome reprieve after the harrowing night they'd endured. Yet, beneath that calm, Adrian's thoughts were a storm. The discovery of the metal box, the truth about Father Alaric, and the painful revelation of Hannah's kidnapping had left scars on them all, some seen, some hidden. Adrian hadn't slept. His mind churned relentlessly, circling around what they'd uncovered in the church basement. The cries, the chains, the betrayal, all of it. How could someone entrusted with faith and guidance become the very source of fear? But even as those thoughts plagued him, Adrian knew he couldn't stop now. They were too close. The evidence found in the hidden storage, the bundles of money, the map, and now the community finally witnessing the priest's downfall, each piece brought them closer to understanding the full truth. There was something deeper beneath this all, something even darker than they had yet seen. As the village began to stir with the rising sun, Adrian gently rose and stepped outside. The crisp air bit at his skin, but he welcomed it. He needed clarity, and the open morning helped. He walked past the small garden, his boots crunching on gravel, and knelt by the old well. From there he could see the steeple of the church rising against the pale sky, its once holy silhouette now a looming shadow. He remembered the look on Father Alaric's face, twisted with desperation and rage. The man was cornered. Yes, but there was more in his eyes than fear of punishment. There was guilt, there was shame, and perhaps there was fear. Not of being caught, but of something worse being revealed. That terrified Adrian more than anything. Behind him, the door creaked, and Bram trotted out, wagging his tail. The dog gave him a knowing look, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Then came Hannah, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes tired but resolute. "I couldn't sleep either," she said softly, walking up beside him. Adrian looked at her and offered a gentle nod. "It's not over yet." "No," she replied. "It's not." They stood there for a moment, staring out at the village that was still recovering from the previous night's truth. The people had gathered, listened, believed, but believing didn't mean healing. They needed more. Closure, justice, and understanding. "I think we missed something," Adrian finally said. Hannah turned to him. "What do you mean?" "The map, the storage, the money. That was all part of the puzzle. But there's still one piece that doesn't fit. Why?" He met her eyes, and she immediately understood. "Why would he do all of this?" she echoed. "Why take the money? Why keep me there? And what was he so afraid of us finding?" Adrian took a deep breath. "We need to go back." Hannah hesitated, but only for a second. "Then we go." The church was colder than Adrian remembered. Its stone walls, once symbols of solace, now radiated a chilling silence. The villagers had locked the main doors after the incident, but Adrian had asked for the key from the mayor, who, after some hesitation, handed it over with trembling hands. No one wanted to step foot in the sanctuary anymore. Bram led the way, nose low, ears perked. He seemed more focused than usual, and Adrian trusted the dog's instincts. They made their way past the altar, back to the small door behind the tapestry that led to the staircase. It groaned as Adrian pushed it open, the musty smell of the underground washing over them once more. With the flashlight in hand, Adrian led them down, each creaking step echoing ominously. The chains that had once bound Hannah had been removed, but the chair remained, a stark reminder of her suffering. She paused as they passed it, her breath catching for a moment before she steeled herself and moved on. They reached the storage chamber, where the bundles of cash had been hidden in hollowed-out panels, and scanned the room again. "Is there anything else?" Hannah asked. Adrian didn't answer. His eyes moved across the stone walls, noting every crack, every line, every imperfection. Then he saw it. A section of the wall, too smooth, too clean compared to the rest. He walked toward it, pressing his hand against the stone. It gave slightly under pressure. A hidden door. His heart raced. He looked back at Hannah and Bram, then pushed harder. The panel creaked, revealing a narrow passage, darker and damper than anything they'd walked through before. A gust of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of mildew, dust, and something else. Decay. They exchanged a glance. Then Adrian stepped inside. The corridor wound downward, deeper into the earth. Roots broke through the ceiling, and the air grew thicker with every step. They moved slowly, carefully. Bram sniffed ahead, pausing now and then, ears twitching. Eventually, the passage opened into a chamber, a crypt. Adrian's flashlight scanned the room, revealing rows of ancient coffins, stone slabs, and symbols carved into the walls. Symbols that didn't belong in any church. "These aren't religious," Hannah whispered, tracing one with her fingers. "They're old. Pagan, maybe?" Adrian nodded grimly. This wasn't just a church. This place was built on something much older. He moved further into the room and found what appeared to be an altar, this one far more primitive. Dried herbs, bones, and strange artifacts lay atop it. At the base, more boxes. He opened one slowly. Inside were documents, handwritten letters, records, and names. Names of people from the village. Donations tracked not just in money, but in favours, secrets, bargains. "What is this?" Hannah murmured. "A ledger," Adrian replied, "of sins." One of the letters caught his attention. It was written by Father Alaric. "I didn't want to continue this, but the council insists the tradition must be kept. They say the protection of the village depends on it. But I've seen what it does to people, the fear, the power it gives. It's no longer about protection, it's about control. And now Hannah knows. If she speaks, everything falls apart." Adrian read the words aloud, his voice shaking. "So it wasn't just him," Hannah said, eyes wide with horror. "There are others, a council, people who knew. They've been using this place, this secret, for generations." Bram barked suddenly, low and sharp. Then they heard it. Footsteps. Someone was coming. They turned off the flashlight and crouched behind the stone altar, hearts pounding. A dim lantern flickered down the hall. Adrian peered out and recognized one of the elders, Thomas, a man who had always stood beside Father Alaric. He walked into the room slowly, muttering to himself. "Stupid boy, couldn't keep quiet. Should have ended it when we had the chance." He moved to one of the coffins, pulled out a hidden compartment, and began to sort through papers. Adrian crept behind him, silent as shadow. With Bram watching closely and Hannah ready, he grabbed the man from behind and pinned him to the ground. "Who else is involved?" Adrian demanded. Thomas struggled, wheezing. "You don't understand. It's not what you think. We kept the balance. The village prospered because of us." "You kidnapped an innocent woman," Hannah yelled. "We had no choice," he shouted back. "She was going to destroy everything. The people need stability, faith, order." Adrian tightened his grip. "No, they need the truth." The confrontation ended with Thomas bound and taken back to the village. When Adrian presented the documents to the townspeople, the truth unravelled like a thread. What had once been blind trust now turned into righteous fury. More names came forward, more confessions. The village, shaken to its core, was finally awake. In the days that followed, those who had been complicit were removed from positions of power. Investigators arrived. The ancient crypt was sealed, its dark legacy finally brought into the light. The church itself was closed indefinitely. But amid the chaos, something beautiful happened. The villagers began to talk again, not just to each other, but about what mattered, about truth, about healing. Hannah, though still recovering, stood tall among them. Adrian, by her side, found himself accepted, respected, and Bram, brave, loyal Bram, became a symbol of courage and loyalty. The sanctuary had fallen, but something better was rising in its place, something honest. The air in the village had shifted. A fog of unease clung to every corner, curling around doorways and seeping into conversations that trailed off the moment someone approached. Yet among the silence, one truth burned steadily in Adrian's chest. There was no turning back now. Bram padded beside him, his paws barely making a sound on the cobbled path leading to the old rectory. Adrian had left Hannah resting in the care of Thomas's sister, Clara, who was both kind-hearted and fiercely protective. Clara had promised to keep Hannah safe, and that gave Adrian the strength to keep going. The map they'd discovered in the church's hidden vault pointed to something deeper, something older. What they had uncovered so far was just the surface. Beneath it, layers of deceit waited like forgotten roots beneath the forest floor. Adrian's thoughts tangled as he recalled Father Alaric's face in the dim church basement, distorted by rage and fear. That man had once baptized children and comforted the dying. How could such a soul turn so dark? He stopped before the rectory, the building now abandoned, since Alaric had been taken into custody by the village council. Yet something told Adrian this place held more secrets. The way Alaric had spoken, his desperate cries, the madness in his eyes, it suggested unfinished business. Adrian pushed the heavy door open with effort. The hinges groaned like something awakening from slumber. Bram let out a low growl and took a cautious step forward. "Easy, boy," Adrian whispered, his heart thudding in his chest. Inside, dust danced in beams of fading sunlight. The furniture remained as it had been, humble, sparse, and cloaked in dust covers, but it was the fireplace that caught Adrian's attention. On the stone mantel sat a brass crucifix, tarnished with age, yet recently moved. There were faint markings beneath it, as if something had been shifted hastily. Adrian reached for the crucifix, turning it over gently. Beneath it, he found a hollow carved into the stone. Within it rested a small leather-bound notebook, worn and stained at the edges. He opened it slowly. The writing was Father Alaric's, no doubt about it. Yet this wasn't a sermon book or theological musings. It was a confession. They trusted me, and for years I believed I served something greater. But the Order, those men who came from the capital in dark robes and colder eyes, promised me something more. They showed me the artifact, the box, said it had been sealed for centuries beneath our church, said it held power. They warned me never to open it, but I did, and from that moment the visions came, the woman in white, the whispering in the night. I thought it was divine revelation, but now I know I was deceived. The money was to protect the church, to buy silence, but Hannah, she found out, brave, foolish girl. She confronted me in the confessional. I didn't know what to do. Adrian's breath caught. The box, the same one they had discovered, had once been sealed and hidden deliberately. Whatever Alaric had unleashed was not meant to be found. He read on, heart racing. "If you are reading this, then I have failed. The Order will come for you too. They will not let the artifact be destroyed. It's not just money or power they crave. It's something darker. If there's hope, it lies beneath the tree." The last sentence was underlined twice in red ink. "Beneath the tree?" Adrian murmured aloud. Bram tilted his head as if urging him to think. The tree, could it be the ancient oak in the graveyard? The one the villagers whispered about? Children avoided it, and elders spoke of curses and lost spirits. It stood alone, towering and ancient, at the very edge of the church's land. Adrian didn't hesitate. He pocketed the notebook and rushed out, Bram close on his heels. The graveyard was quiet, but not peaceful. The tree loomed at its centre, branches like crooked fingers against the overcast sky. Adrian approached it slowly, every step echoing in the silence. Bram sniffed at the ground, then let out a soft bark, tail raised. Adrian followed the dog's lead to a patch of disturbed earth near the tree's roots. Someone had been here recently. He knelt down, brushed the dirt away, and uncovered a trapdoor reinforced with rusted iron. Adrian's stomach twisted. He reached for the iron ring and pulled. It groaned open, releasing a foul, musty air that smelled of damp stone and rot. A narrow staircase disappeared into the darkness below. Without hesitation, Adrian switched on his flashlight and descended. Bram following behind. The passage was ancient, carved from stone, and etched with symbols that pulsed with a strange energy. At the end of the tunnel stood a heavy wooden door, blackened with age. He reached for the handle, and it creaked open with an eerie ease. The room beyond was like a forgotten crypt. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient scrolls, candles, and bones. At the centre of the room sat a pedestal, and upon it another box. Not the one they'd already found. This one was older, bound in metal etched with runes and sealed with a lock shaped like a serpent devouring its own tail. Adrian stepped forward, trembling. Suddenly, Bram barked, a warning, and from the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in dark robes. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but his voice was cold and sharp. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. Adrian stood his ground. "Who are you?" "I am what Father Alaric failed to become, a guardian of the Order." Adrian's hand reached for the box. The man stepped forward. "Touch it," he warned, "and you doom us all." "Then why protect it?" Adrian asked. "What's inside?" The man's silence was answer enough. Adrian could see it now. This box, this relic, was not divine. It was a prison. Something had been sealed within long ago. "Alaric opened the other one," Adrian said. "He paid the price. But I'm not him. I'm going to destroy it." "You can't." "I have to." With a surge of courage, Adrian grabbed the box. The hooded man lunged, but Bram met him mid-air, knocking him down with a growl. Adrian dashed past and ran, the box cradled in his arms, the crypt trembling behind him. He burst from the graveyard just as the sun began to set, casting the world in a blood-orange hue. Bram bounded beside him, unharmed but wary. Behind them, the trapdoor slammed shut of its own accord, as if the very earth was sealing away what had been disturbed. Adrian ran straight to Clara's house. Hannah was sitting by the window, pale but stronger, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "I found it," Adrian said breathlessly. "There's another box, the real one." Hannah stood with effort. "We need to destroy it." Clara, wide-eyed, stepped back. "What are you two bringing into my house?" "Truth," Adrian said quietly, "and danger." He placed the box on the table, and the air in the room seemed to shift, growing heavier, colder. Hannah reached out and touched the metal seal. It pulsed beneath her fingers. "I've seen this before," she whispered, "in my dreams. It's not just evil, it hungers." They debated long into the night, how to destroy it, where it had come from, whether anyone would believe them if they tried to explain, but in the end, they knew the answer lay not in hiding, but in facing it. The following morning, the three of them stood on the edge of the cliffs beyond the village. The ocean roared below, wild and unrelenting. Adrian held the box tightly. "Are you ready?" he asked. Hannah nodded. "It's time." He raised the box, and with all his strength, hurled it into the sea. The waves swallowed it whole, and for a brief second the wind seemed to howl in protest. Then, silence, peace. Adrian fell to his knees, overwhelmed. Hannah dropped beside him, her hand in his. Bram stood between them, silent and proud. For now, the village was safe. But Adrian knew the shadows would always remember, and they would always be ready. The sun dipped low over the village of Elderglen, casting elongated shadows across cobbled streets and quiet rooftops. The air was thick with uncertainty, and the weight of truth hung heavy in every whispered conversation. Though Father Elias had been apprehended, and Clara was safely in the care of Adrian and the villagers, a lingering unease still haunted the hearts of all who had witnessed the events of the past few days. Inside the modest home that now served as a place of healing, Clara sat by the window, her pale face bathed in golden twilight. She had not spoken much since her rescue, only sharing fragments of what had happened in the crypt beneath the church. Her eyes, once filled with spirited curiosity, now held shadows deeper than anyone could comprehend. Adrian sat beside her, gently pouring a cup of herbal tea. Bram lay at Clara's feet, his head resting on her shoes, as if guarding her from any further harm. "You're safe now," Adrian whispered. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." Clara turned slowly to look at him, her voice trembling. "There's more beneath the church. He wasn't working alone." Adrian's hand froze around the cup. "What do you mean?" Clara swallowed hard, her fingers twisting in the folds of her blanket. "There's another room. I heard voices, not just his. He mentioned a name, Seraphine." Adrian felt his chest tighten. The name echoed through his mind like a forgotten prayer. He had come here to find Hannah's truth, to uncover what had happened to her and how it tied to the hidden greed within the church. But now, Clara's revelation suggested a deeper, more sinister web, one that had yet to fully unravel. That night, as Clara rested and the village lay under a veil of uneasy sleep, Adrian sat alone in the garden, flipping through Hannah's diary once more. His fingers traced a passage he had overlooked in earlier readings. "If anything happens to me, look beyond the sanctuary. The truth is buried deeper than most are willing to dig. Seraphine watches from the shadows." The next morning, Adrian gathered Bram and made his way toward the church again. Though the doors had been locked since Father Elias's arrest, he knew a side entrance that had once served as a maintenance passage. The air inside was musty, thick with incense and secrets. Bram's nails clicked softly against the old stone floor as they moved through the main hall. The candlelight from the stained glass windows coloured everything in a surreal kaleidoscope of reds and golds, blues and purples. It was beautiful, but hollow, a holy shell filled with silence. Adrian paused near the altar. Clara had said the voices came from beneath. He knelt, examining the ornate flooring. After several minutes of searching, he noticed a narrow seam that outlined a hidden trapdoor near the base of the lectern. Taking a deep breath, he pressed against the floor. The wood creaked but resisted. Bram, ever perceptive, sniffed the area and let out a quiet bark, his tail stiff with alertness. Adrian leaned in closer and noticed a small indentation, just the right size for a key. The key from the metal box. His hands trembled as he retrieved it from his coat and inserted it. The mechanism clicked, ancient and reluctant. The trapdoor opened with a groan, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. Lighting a lantern he had brought, Adrian began the descent. The air grew colder with each step, and the stone walls seemed to close in around him. Bram stayed close, his ears perked and eyes scanning the shadows. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small chamber, and Adrian immediately sensed something was wrong. The room was lined with dusty relics and broken pews. In the centre stood a table, and upon it, old documents, ledgers and photographs. One image showed Father Elias standing beside a woman in ceremonial robes, her expression stern, her eyes nearly as sharp as the carving knife beside the sacramental bread. Beneath the photo was a name, handwritten and almost faded completely. Seraphine Calder. Adrian's heart raced. There was a deeper corruption here, one that predated even Elias. And from the writings and records in front of him, Seraphine was the architect. The records showed a network of wealth laundering, dark rituals disguised as sacred ceremonies, and a long list of those who had disappeared over the years after discovering too much. He flipped a page and found a letter addressed to Father Elias from Seraphine herself. "The girl knows too much. Silence her. The congregation remains blind, and that's how we keep our power. The box must never be found." Bram let out a growl, low and tense. Footsteps echoed down the stairway behind them. Adrian turned, his body going rigid. A woman stood at the base of the stairs, cloaked in black, her silver hair braided down her back like a serpent. Her eyes gleamed with cold calculation. "Looking for ghosts, are we?" she said, her voice like brittle glass. "Seraphine," Adrian said. She tilted her head slightly, unimpressed. "Ah, so you've heard of me? How quaint. You orchestrated everything. Elias was just a pawn." Seraphine stepped closer, slowly. "He was useful, but too emotional. I told him not to keep the girl alive. I suppose sentiment got the better of him." Adrian's fists clenched. "She's just a child." "She was going to ruin everything," Seraphine snapped, her cold facade cracking for a moment. "We built this church from dust. People needed faith, and we gave it to them. In return, they gave us everything. Including their lives," Adrian said, stepping in front of Bram. "I suppose you're here to play hero now?" she said mockingly. "You and your little mutt." At that, Bram snarled, stepping forward protectively. "Let's not make this difficult," she said, drawing a small blade from beneath her cloak. "No one needs to know what you found down here. We can make it look like an accident. You came looking for redemption and found nothing but darkness." Adrian stood his ground, heart pounding. He remembered the names in the ledger, the voices Clara had heard, Hannah's warning in the diary. "I won't let you keep this buried." A sudden shout echoed from above. "Adrian!" It was Clara's voice. Distracted, Seraphine turned for a moment. That was all Bram needed. With a growl like thunder, he lunged, sinking his teeth into Seraphine's arm. She screamed, dropping the blade. Adrian rushed forward and tackled her, pinning her to the floor. Bram held firm, snarling as she struggled beneath Adrian's weight. Clara appeared moments later, flanked by villagers who had followed her from the cottage. The old constable, Mr. Dunley, stepped into the chamber, eyes wide at the scene before him. "My God," he muttered. Adrian rose, breathless. She was behind all of it, Elias, the disappearances, the money, everything. Dunley stepped forward, placing iron cuffs on Seraphine's wrists. She didn't resist, just smiled, a twisted, chilling expression. "You think taking me away changes anything?" she said softly. "You've only cut off one head." "There are more." Clara clutched Adrian's hand, her fingers cold. "Then we'll find them," Adrian replied. "All of them." Back above ground, the villagers gathered once more, this time in front of the church. Adrian spoke not with the triumph of a hero, but with the steady voice of a man who had seen the worst in people and still chose to fight for the best in them. He told them everything: the ledger, the letter, the network Seraphine had run, the money stolen in the name of God, the lives silenced to protect power. He opened the hidden room for all to see, showed the documents and the photos. There were no more secrets now. The village was quiet for a long time afterward. Healing would take time. But the truth had broken free from the crypts of the past, and it could not be buried again. That evening, as the sun set and the church doors were sealed for the last time, Clara sat beside Adrian, her hand resting on Bram's head. "You were right," she whispered. "It all started beneath the church." Adrian looked at her, at the little girl who had survived so much. "No," he said softly. "It started with one person deciding to be brave, and it ends with all of us choosing not to look away." The days following the dramatic confrontation in the village square were filled with an eerie calm, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Father Alaric had been taken into custody, his face a mask of disgrace, as he was escorted away from the village under heavy guard. The shock of his betrayal still reverberated through every household, every conversation whispered over fences and across market stalls. No one had imagined that the man who had once stood at the altar, delivering sermons of hope and redemption, could harbour such darkness in his soul. Adrian remained in the village, his heart not yet ready to move on. There was still too much left unresolved. And Clara, she was alive, yes, but the wounds ran deep. Physically, she was healing under the care of a gentle older woman named Eliza, who had once been a nurse in the city. But emotionally, Clara remained trapped in the shadows of what she had endured. Adrian visited her every day. Sometimes they talked, mostly about small things, how the breeze felt that morning, how Bram seemed to have taken up a new habit of chasing butterflies. But other times she would simply look at him with tired eyes, silent, yet thankful. Those moments cut Adrian the deepest. He wanted to reach her, to pull her back from whatever edge she stood on. But healing, he reminded himself, was a process, and sometimes the strongest thing you could do was simply be there. Bram, ever faithful, was a silent comfort to them both. He stayed close to Clara, his head often resting on her feet, his eyes watchful and filled with quiet devotion. It was as if he knew she needed him just as much as she needed Adrian. One late afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun poured through the window of Eliza's cottage, Clara finally spoke of that terrible night. "I saw the truth in his eyes," she said softly, her voice brittle like dry leaves. "Not just the madness, but the belief. He really thought he was saving something." Adrian nodded gently, his hand resting over hers. "He was trying to protect his lies built over years." She turned her head to look at him. "But why me? Why did he take me?" Adrian hesitated. The answer had haunted him too. "Because you were brave," he said finally. "Because you saw what others refused to. You were getting close to something that would have exposed him. He needed to silence you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I didn't think it would cost so much." Adrian's grip tightened. "You're here. That matters more than anything." Clara lowered her gaze. "I'm not the same." "No," Adrian agreed, his voice steady. "You're stronger." Meanwhile, the villagers were trying to rebuild, not just their homes or routines, but their faith in each other. For years, Father Alaric had been a pillar of their lives, a man they entrusted with their confessions, their secrets, their grief. To have that trust shattered so completely left many reeling. Some stopped attending church altogether. Others wandered the chapel aimlessly, unsure of what to believe in anymore. Thomas, the blacksmith, who had once carved wooden crosses for the altar, now sat on his porch with his tools untouched. Maren, who had played the church organ every Sunday, hadn't sung a note since the arrest. The village had been wounded, not by fire or storm, but by betrayal. Eliza and Adrian spoke late into the night about what might be done, and it was the older woman who said, in her quiet wisdom, "What this village needs isn't a new priest. It needs truth. It needs the courage to see itself clearly." Her words stayed with Adrian. The truth had come out, but it was not yet embraced. People needed more than exposure. They needed understanding, healing, closure. That's when Adrian remembered the diary. Clara's journal, discovered in her cottage and filled with the breadcrumbs that had led to the discovery of the hidden room, the embezzled money, and the horrible secret Father Alaric had kept buried. He had kept it safe, wrapped in a scarf inside his satchel. He asked Clara, days later, if she would allow the villagers to hear her words. At first, she recoiled. "It's too personal," she said. "It was never meant for anyone else." "I know," Adrian said gently, "but it was your voice that started all of this. Maybe it's your voice that can help end it, help others see they weren't blind, just misled." Clara took a long time to consider, but one evening, under the silver light of a full moon, she placed the diary into Adrian's hands. "If you think it will help," she whispered, "read it." The village gathered in the chapel, though it felt strange to be there again. The air still carried echoes of the past, of prayers and also lies. But this time it wasn't a priest who stood before them. It was Adrian, flanked by Eliza and Bram. Clara sat quietly near the front, her eyes lowered, her fingers intertwined in her lap. Adrian opened the diary, his voice steady but low as he began to read. He read of Clara's suspicions, of the nights she had noticed Father Alaric leaving the rectory with the metal box, the strange figures who came to the church at night, the quiet disappearances of donation money, the day she found the hidden storage key. And finally, the moment she realized she was being followed. He read her fears, her doubts, her loneliness, but he also read her strength, her determination, her desire to protect the people of the village, even if they didn't yet believe her. When he finished, there was silence. Then Thomas stood. "I thought she was imagining things," he admitted, "but she saw the truth when we refused to." Others nodded. Murmurs filled the space like the rustle of autumn leaves. Maren stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I believed in Father Alaric, and I still believe in God, but now I know they're not the same thing." Adrian turned to Clara. Her eyes met his, and in that moment he saw something shift, a weight lifting. She had feared their judgment, but instead she found their gratitude. The diary was placed on the chapel's lectern, not as evidence, but as a testament, a symbol that truth, even when painful, could set things right. Weeks passed, and slowly life began to rebuild itself. The chapel was no longer just a church. It became a place where people came to speak, to share memories, fears, and hope. Clara started attending gatherings, first in silence, and then speaking in short, careful phrases. Every word she offered felt like a blooming flower. Bram became the village's beloved companion. Children fed him treats. Elders scratched behind his ears. His presence was a comfort no one knew they needed. Adrian, too, began to find something he hadn't known he was looking for, a sense of belonging, of purpose beyond the mystery. He started helping Eliza with repairs to her cottage, organizing the gatherings at the chapel, walking Bram through the village in the early mornings when the mist still kissed the ground. And with every passing day he and Clara grew closer. Not in some sudden, dramatic way, but in the quiet language of shared glances, soft laughter, and unspoken understanding. They had been through fire and shadow, and now they were finding their way toward the light. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the old oak tree that marked the edge of the village, Clara looked up at him. "Do you think it'll always feel like this? Like something's missing?" Adrian thought for a moment, watching the leaves sway. "Maybe," he said, "but sometimes we don't need to fill the space. Sometimes we just need to learn how to live with it. and let something new grow around it. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. Bram lay beside them, his tail thumping softly against the earth, and for the first time in a long while, they felt peace. The village lay silent under a soft golden morning haze, its old stones and narrow paths quietly witnessing the change that had swept through it. A once tightly wound web of secrecy had unravelled, leaving behind threads of raw truth and deep, lingering emotion. Adrian stood at the edge of the village square, gazing at the old church that had once loomed with shadows. Now, in the sunlight, its contours seemed gentler, as though even the building itself had exhaled a long-held breath. Clara stood beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes distant yet peaceful. Bram the dog lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws, but his ears still twitching at every subtle sound. The events of the past days had been a storm, but now the calm had come, and in the calm came reflection. Clara was healing. Physically, her bruises and weakness were easing, and emotionally, she had found safety in Adrian's unwavering presence. He'd become her anchor in a sea that had nearly swallowed her whole. As they sat on the steps of the community hall, where the villagers were now organising the rebuilding of trust, Adrian turned to her and quietly asked, "How are you really feeling?" Clara looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with the sunlight and something far deeper. "I still hear the silence of that basement sometimes," she admitted. "I still wake up wondering if I'm back there. But then I see you, and I see Bram, and I remember I'm not alone anymore." Adrian placed a gentle hand over hers. "You're not," he said simply. "You never will be." The villagers had rallied behind Clara and Adrian after the exposure of Father Elias's treachery. Though disbelief lingered in the eyes of some, no one could refute the evidence. The stolen money, the secret storage, the chains that had held Clara, all of it was real, and so was the courage it had taken to reveal it. But even justice leaves behind scars. The betrayal of Father Elias, a man revered for decades, had torn open wounds in the community's soul. Trust, once given so freely, was now tentative, hesitant. In the days that followed, Clara spent her time walking through the village gardens, rediscovering the places she had once loved. Adrian often accompanied her, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, letting her lead the pace. Bram followed faithfully, never more than a few steps behind, as if understanding that Clara's safety was now his life's mission. Adrian, too, was adjusting. His visit to the village had changed from a brief stay into something far more permanent. He had seen too much, felt too deeply, to simply walk away. Clara had become more than just a connection. She was part of him now, part of a life he hadn't realized he was missing until he found it. One afternoon, as they walked past the orchard where the first leaves of spring were budding, Clara stopped. She bent down to touch the soil near one of the old pear trees. "My mother planted this when I was little," she said. "She used to say that growth takes patience, that even when you can't see anything happening above ground, the roots are still working beneath. I think that's where I am now. Underground growth." Adrian knelt beside her, his gaze soft. "And I think you're already blooming." Their bond deepened with each passing day. The village, too, began to stir with life again. It wasn't easy. Pain never just disappears, but healing had begun. Father Elias had been taken away by authorities. His trial was scheduled in a neighbouring city, and villagers had already started organising to testify, to ensure that his crimes wouldn't be buried like the secrets he'd once kept beneath the church. Adrian and Clara would both speak, and Bram, with his soulful eyes and protective heart, would be there too, even if only as a quiet symbol of truth. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, casting golden ribbons across the sky, Clara invited Adrian to the edge of the woods. "There's something I want to show you," she said. They walked hand in hand, Bram scouting ahead. At a clearing, she pointed toward a stone bench half covered in moss and thyme. "My father built this for my mother," she said softly. "It was their favourite spot. When she passed, he used to sit here for hours. Sometimes he talked to her, sometimes he just listened." Adrian sat down beside her, understanding that this was more than just a place. It was memory and loss and love all wrapped into one. "After all this," Clara said, looking at the trees swaying in the breeze, "I feel like I finally understand them. my parents, the strength they had to face everything. I didn't know I had that in me, but I do. You have more strength than anyone I've ever met, Adrian said. They sat there until the stars began to appear, one by one, across the darkening sky. It was a quiet night, filled with the kind of peace that only comes after surviving something immense. Weeks passed. The village hosted a small ceremony, a quiet celebration of truth and healing. The mayor spoke gently, addressing the sorrow and the shame, but also the courage of those who had stood up. Clara and Adrian were at the centre, though neither had asked for the spotlight. Children ran around Bram, tying ribbons around his neck and calling him Sir Bram the Brave. He didn't seem to mind. He accepted every pat on the head with the solemn dignity of a knight who had fulfilled his mission. Clara took the stage, her voice steady but filled with emotion. There were days, she said, when I didn't think I'd make it out alive, but love saved me. Love and truth and the bravery of those who refused to stop searching. The darkness we uncovered didn't define this village. It reminded us of what truly matters: honesty, compassion, and the strength we find in each other. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was deep. It came from the heart. After the ceremony, Adrian found Clara alone, beneath the lanterns strung across the square. "I've been thinking," he began. Clara turned to him, her brow curious. "About?" He took her hand, then gently knelt on one knee, his heart in his throat. "About roots, about staying, about building something here with you. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know I want to face it with you." Clara's eyes filled, but not with pain, with joy, with the kind of hope she never thought she'd feel again. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Adrian." Bram barked once in approval, and the lanterns above seemed to glow a little brighter. In the months that followed, the village began to transform, not just on the outside, but within. People spoke more openly. They looked each other in the eyes. They shared stories they had once been too afraid to speak. Clara opened a small community library in the building that had once stored shadows. She filled it with books, photographs, journals, even the pages of her own diary that had started it all. "Truth deserves to be remembered," she'd said. Adrian helped restore the village school and started offering writing workshops to the children. He encouraged them to tell their stories, to use words as a way to heal, to connect, to dream. And Bram? Bram became the village's honorary guardian. He attended every meeting, every event, tail wagging, eyes wise. He was more than a dog. He was a symbol of loyalty, of courage, of the instinct to protect what matters most. One evening, as the breeze whispered through the trees and the stars painted the sky again, Adrian and Clara sat on the old bench near the woods. "So," Adrian said, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, "do you think it's over?" Clara leaned against him, her gaze soft. "No, but I think the worst is, and from here on it's a different kind of story. A better one, a truer one," she said. And with that they sat in silence, letting the night cradle them, letting the past become part of a future built on truth, on healing, and above all, on love.